Hello students. Now today we will be discussing about a very important aspect and function of management, the concept of organizing. What exactly is organizing and how does it become so relevant for any kind of a organization where we talk about management? Mostly, once a plan is made, it has been created. A manager now begins to organize. It involves, assigning tasks, grouping the tasks into departments, mostly talks about delegating authority, and very specifically allocating resources across the organization. During this process, managers, they are required to coordinate with employees, the resources, policies, and procedures. The need is to facilitate the goals identified in their plan. So whatever they had prepared, whatever the managers have understood, it is actually now the time has come to execute it. Before a plan can be implemented, the manager has to organize the assets of the business in order to execute this plan, whatever has been prepared. So, very clear understanding of this specialization and the division of work is very, very important since the assets here are actually employees. So, the specialization of the workforce according to the skills of a person, creating specific personal and professional development within that workforce is important. Reason is very simple because it needs to be done to increase the productivity, which can lead to specialization, which will increase the work efficiency a lot. So by separating a small part of work, the speed and the accuracy definitely relates to the performance of the employees. So this is something which is technical also as well as totally managerial in aspect. So it becomes really necessary to do this proper allocation because it facilitates, as I said, it also expedites decision making. It is a very complex aspect of any management because it involves very systematic reviewing. So that is why we say that it has to be a very, very conscious call which has to be taken. Um, there are a lot of benefits which are involved with organizing per se, while the planning function of managers, it was, essential to reach business goal. Lots of careful planning can go to waste if the managers really, fail to organize the company's assets and the resources adequately. So there are a lot of benefits which are definitely attached to this concept. So we'll talk about them one by one. So the first one, it says that organization harmonizes employees' individual goals with the overall objectives of the firm because, it has to have an integration. It's very, very important because if employees are working without any regard for the bigger picture, then the organization really, loses the cohesion which is necessary to work as a unit because organization is a unit. Um, then when we talk about organization, one more concept which is very important is, and we will take it up in detail in some times, is something called as a structure, an organizational structure. Now it is very essential because the expansion of business activities can be done only if you have a proper structure in mind, because the structure improves tracking and accountability, and it helps businesses determine the resources it really requires in order to grow its business. So even if it is looking for product diversification, or let's say a new product line has to be developed, so it gives a very clear understanding that this much of resources are available with the organization. um, then again, of course, this component of organization, it aids business efficiency and it helps reduce waste a lot. Because, in order to maximize efficiency, some businesses, they try to centralize operations while other arrange operations with customer or regional demands in the mind. Because it's all about how quickly you respond to a problem and how efficient you are in your working. So it's definitely a very, very big resource which is in the hands of the managers. A strong organizational structure generally makes something called as a chain of command very clear, you know. Of course, we'll talk about it in a while because it tells the employee very clearly whose direction they should follow. So I should be able to know who is my reporting authority. It improves accountability also because it's very important when the outcomes are measured and analyzed. There are lots of benefits. In fact, it was a very small list. But coming to the most important component of organizing as a concept is that there are a lot of elements, specific elements which become very, very relevant and important from a manager's perspective. So in order to make it very effective in its purpose, the elements are, as you can see on the slide, there are a lot of elements which have been mentioned here. So the first one, it says that the first and the most important is a common purpose. Now, an organization with a clear purpose or mission generally is the one which is very easy to understand and manage. We all, of course, agree to it. Common purpose generally, unifies employees and it helps them understand that the organization has a direction and what exactly is that direction. So, common purpose, a strategy, which is an organization strategy, the objectives, the long term, as well as the short term objectives. It becomes very, very relevant here. The role of communicating all these components, how it has to be communicated to each and every employee, that is something which is actually a manager's job. It's their responsibility. So, when we talk about the second component, that is the coordinated effort. Now, coordinated effort, if we talk about an organization, we all agree that it's a very unified concept which we are talking about. So it is, a manager's very important responsibilities to coordinate the effort of work so that it maximizes the resources with a common purpose in mind because it's relevant, it's essential. So he has to, there is a need to leverage all the employees' skill sets, their experience and personalities in a way that consistently adds value. So in order to do that, the manager should take into account employees' preferences as they has to be related to, something called as job satisfaction and engagement. Then talking about something called as division of labor and specialization. So, early in the 20th century, every employee, in a very, it's a very famous organization, the Ford Motor Company. The assembly line had a very specific and a repetitive task. So, for example, one person would install the wheels on the left side of the car, another would install the front bumper, and the whole job, the entire job of making that car was, broken down into specific standardized tasks, repeating them over and over again. So it was more like, every day you're doing the same thing over and over. The reason this assembly line production became one of the biggest reason of a Ford coming up with one car every 10 seconds, that was the efficiency level to which they reached. So many organizations, they demonstrated that specialization definitely makes the work more efficient. So, management saw this as one of the most efficient use of relative skills of its employees. So agreeing to it, coming up with something called as every now and then you need certain kind of tasks and you need certain kind of people, specialized people to perform those tasks again becomes very relevant and important. Division of labor, on the other hand, it describes the degree to which a task is divided into separate jobs or even departments. But the motive is very clear. The motive is that efficiency has to be improved. So, specialization kind of, requires a trade-off between breadth and depth of knowledge, we would say, because a high degree of specialization can increase productivity, and it usually, has undesirable side effects like reduced employee job satisfaction. Now, reason is very simple because it's a very repetitive task, so it becomes very monotonous. So we sometimes also say that, specialization limits the agility of a workforce because employees cannot fill in for people in other areas of the business. And employees take very long to qualify for certain managerial positions. So that is one aspect, of course. Now, coming on to a very important aspect, what you can see on the slide, which talks about the chain of command and the span of control. Now, this is something which is per se one of the most important components which is, spoken of. What is this chain of command? So you can see some green and red boxes here. So it's like, the chain of command is, it's like an unbroken line of authority that extends from the top of organization to the lowest level, and mostly it clarifies who reports to whom. So if you can see very clearly here, the CEO has president, executive vice president, and then it comes down to the VPs, and then region wise the segregation, and of course district wide segregation has been done. So, the idea of the chain of command is very simple because it kind of, describes the right inherent in a managerial position to give orders and also to expect orders to be obeyed. That, if the president has to, convey something to the vice president, then the vice president should know that if I'm getting certain kind of instructions from the president, then it's something which needs to be done very promptly. And more or less, then when we talk about this concept here, we say that it's relevant, it's important because it somewhere makes the communication aspect very, very clear. Span of control is dealing with the number of subordinates a manager can effectively direct. Now, this is something which is like, the CEO or the chief executive officer knows very clearly that there is executive vice president, two executive vice president, and then there is a president. So they are totally, they are directly related to me. The wider an organization can make, its manager's span of control, the more efficient it will be, because it talks about cost saving aspect also, and somewhere decision making is totally aligned here. So, the organization starts working in a very, very a specific manner. If the layers keep on adding, the message has to travel from one manager to another manager. So, the trend sometimes changes also. It's actually very, very specific. It depends upon the organizations really. So, talking about another concept of centralization and decentralization. So that is another very relevant element, I would say. It's a very important element which needs to be spoken of when we talk about, organization. Centralization, generally refers to the degree to which decision making is concentrated at a single point. So the decision is, it's concentrated as in it is given to one person or one area or one designation. Decentralized, on the other hand, the employees are, empowered to take decisions. So action can be taken very quickly in order to solve problems. And employees' input becomes very, very necessary, and it's actually very crucial also here. The more lower level employees have the power to make decision, the more decentralized an organization becomes, because it's actually like you are empowering your people. You are telling them that if you're facing a problem, this is how you should respond, this is how you can take the corrective measure. Centralized organization, generally, the upper management takes a call, it makes all the decisions, and the lower management mostly has to carry those decisions, has to generally talk about the implementation part of those decisions. Formalization is another very important and crucial element in organizing as a concept. Formalization generally, refers to the degree to which jobs within the organization are standardized. So, if an employee is highly formalized job, has little input as to know how the job has to be done, when it has to be done, and how it should be done. So mostly, worker on the assembly line probably are in a very highly formalized job because they know that, okay, this is the work I need to do, this is the time limit which has been given, etc., etc. Where he doesn't really, have much of a say in how he has to do the job. So it's not really very empowering in concept. And another example can be, an accounts payable associate also doesn't have a lot to say in how those many invoices are being processed. Or, the job is very simple. It's probably a little less formalized than the assembly line worker, but still, not much of a say is given to the profile. A sales associate who has to call on customers may have very little formalization in his job. The reason is very simple because it's more or less depending upon the type of, the category of customers who are coming, what kind of problems they have, what is it that they are looking at, because every customer will come up with their own set of problems, and they will have their own grievances. So generally becomes very important to leave those profiles out of the formalization domain because you cannot really take control and standardize it and say that okay, this is how you should talk, this is how you should respond, because human behavior is very complex. You cannot really uh, you know come up with a very standard operating procedure for these kind of customer grievances or understanding customers challenges, etc. So that is of course very very relevant and important. Okay, now we move ahead and we talk about something called as an organization structure. Now, organization structure are generally, patterns of interaction and coordinations which are designed by the management. And the purpose is that the tasks have to be linked with respect to the individuals and the groups. But here the most important part is that the tasks have to be linked in accordance with what is the organizational goal. What is it that the company wishes to achieve? So the structure should make, efficient use of employee skills. It should be very well laid out. Reason is simple because sometimes we say that, the structure should be such that the employees' skills are improved through repetition. So this is where formalization, the concept of formalization comes into picture. So if it is a task, let's say in a manufacturing unit in a plant where it's very very formalized in nature, so yes, generally we can say that in that kind of a component, the person is improving the skills day by day due to repetition. Organizations can be structured in various ways. You see there are a lot of varieties with each structure determining the manner in which the organization operates and performs. So it is typically represented by something called as an organization chart, and we sometimes call it the org chart, just a short of organization. So it's more like a diagram, which shows the very clear interrelationship of positions which are existing in any organization. The chart mostly highlights the chain of command and sorry, the authority relationships among people who are, working at different levels. This chart also shows the number of layers between the top and the lowest managerial level. because it needs to be very, very clearly, very, in black and white, it has to be there. Um, Other than the, talking about the chain of command, the structure dictates the span of control also, as we spoke earlier, because it's the number of subordinates a supervisor has. So it gives a very clear-cut picture as to, this is the profile. These many people are reporting to this person, and this is the kind of control he or she can exercise. So, an organization with few layers has a very wide span of control, with each manager overseeing a large number of subordinates. With a narrow span of control, we say that only a limited number of subordinates report to each manager. Uh, Mostly the structure really, determines how the organization operates, and how is it really functioning, and what kind of nuances go about into the kind of communication they follow. So it really focuses on those things. Now, this is a very important question. It says, as efficient as organizational structure can be, it can also create problems that can lead to loss of productivity and internal conflict. Why and how? Um, Now, the answer to this question would be that it's creating efficiency only to a time when there are very clear-cut demarcations between profile A, the chain of command and the span of control is clearly mentioned, so that the overlaps are avoided. Two people doing mostly more or less working on the same kind of a at the same kind of a profile, doing mostly the similar kind of job, would definitely not work upon. Conflicts can arise, yes, internal conflict, that's a very, very big problem which, mostly organizations, they are facing also right now. Because if you end up leaving, a team of 5 people working together, where there is no absolute clarity about the role of each team member, you end up doing other person's work, probably taking the credit of it, probably getting rewarded for it, probably creating a lot of opacity in terms of how to assess the performance, how to really map the performance. So at a point, it has to be taken into account. It needs to be minimized. Definitely no structure is as perfect as it sounds, because it cannot really do away with all these things, but these things can definitely be minimized. Now, another question here, it says that structure follows strategy. How? It's simple, because the kind of business strategy the organization has, what is it into, what is it is looking at, and what is the future goal which you are looking at. So you have to take into account your business strategy and work accordingly. So that is why the structuring has to be done keeping in mind, I mean, the topmost priority is your strategy. What is it that you want? What is the vision you are looking at? And of course, as you can see, and relate also, hospitals tend to be not be structured like fast food restaurants, and banks cannot be organized like manufacturing plant. Reason is simple. Their end product is different, their customers are different, the spontaneity matters, the response time. Let's say if I talk about a fast food restaurant and a bank, now here the response time is very, very quick. It has to be very quick. So decision making becomes a very important parameter here. Hospitals is one where you cannot say that you can work with a total centralized approach. However, you cannot make it overly decentralized also, because you have patients who are coming in a hospital, you have people who require critical care, you have people who require, elderly care. So at that point, you really have to talk about empowerment and see how each employee can understand the problem and respond to it. Okay. Now, mostly as you see, these structures or the different categories, they differ on many components, but I have somehow tried to compress it into four. One is strategy, which we have already spoken about. Another is technology. Now, let's say if we are talking about an organization which does not really have much to do in terms of physical presence. Now, if it wants to be virtually connected, that kind of an organization will have a very different structure because all the work, everything is being done work from home, everything is being done through remote working, wherein, whether it is a global level or even pan India. So if you are a virtual organization, then in that sense, in that category, your structure will be totally different as compared to an organization which says that it has offices, it has headquarters, it has branch offices in different regions, different zones, etc. Talking about the environment. Now, environment per se, when we talk about environment, there are lots and lots of, you know, different criterias, because when I talk about environment, I am referring to government rules and regulations. When I talk about environment, sorry, I am also talking about the customers. I am talking about the geographical area. So, a lot of, the entire ecosystem, it plays a major role in what kind of an environment you are and, how you should structure your working style. The organization size is again relatively a very essential component which can definitely not be ignored for reason very simple. How many people are there, the total number of workforce determines a lot what kind of structure you should have in mind. So keeping this in mind, now we move ahead and we see that there are different types of structures, product specific, functional, then you have customer oriented, then you have of course geographic, and then you have something called as a matrix organization. So starting with something called as functional structure. Now, in a functional structure, a common configuration is that an organization is divided into smaller groups by areas of specialty. Now, these specialty areas can be, let's say, IT, finance, operations, and of course, marketing. Some refer to these as functional areas or let's say silos, which are entities that are vertical and mostly or sometimes disconnected from one another. So, accordingly, the company's top management team typically consists of several functional heads. So generally, we have a very common term which we say C-suite, where we will have, let's say, the chief financial officer, we'll have the chief operating officer, we'll have the CXO, we'll have the CHRO, etc. Communication generally occurs within each functional department, and it is transmitted across departments through the various department heads. Now, the functional departments are said to offer very good, greater operational efficiency because, employees there with shared skills and knowledge are grouped together, they are working together. So, more or less, the value addition becomes significantly very high. Each group of specialists can, therefore operate independently with the management acting as the point of cross communication between these functional areas. So this arrangement, this kind of a setup generally allows for increased specialization. And we've already, understood that if you have specialized workers working together, of course, the efficiency aspect increases manifold. Like every structure, this also has a disadvantage. Now, the disadvantage is that different functional groups, many times they do not communicate with one another. Sometimes it, potentially decreases the flexibility and innovation within any business. So that poses a lot of problem. And functional structures, sometimes they are susceptible to, tunnel vision. Each function is looking at the organization from within their own frame, within their own operation. So it is very, very subjective, pertains to only your area. However, looking at the disadvantages what we have, there are a lot of advantages also which cannot be ignored here. Okay, now talking about another very important aspect is something called as a customer oriented or a customer centric structure. Now, this is pertaining to those companies which offer services like, let's say, healthcare, where they mostly talk about, different bases of customers. So, here, if you see, the customers, they differ very significantly. So it makes sense to customize their services also. So let's say if I talk about telecommunication, an organization which is a telecom company, they will have customers ranging from government to corporate to individuals also. And we all understand that every customer will have different kind of expectations. So yes, the services need to be customized. Now, employees can specialize around the type of customer and be very productive with that category. So the direction of each customer center would report, directly to the chief officer, and then the grievances are handled. See, the design is made in such a manner so that it avoids any kind of an overlap, confusion, and of course, redundancies. Mostly, this structure is appropriate when the organization's product or services need to be tailored to specific customers. Okay, then talking about the product-centric approach, the kind of structure here. So generally, companies which have a diversified product line, they structure themselves based on the product or service. Let's say if I pick up GE, for example. Now it has structured 6 product specific divisions which are supported by 6 centralized service divisions. So they have categorized their products as energy, capital, home and business solutions, healthcare, aviation and transportation. The product divisions generally work well, where products are more technical and they require a lot of specialized knowledge. So the product divisions are mostly supported by centralized services, let's say, which are public relations, business development, legal, human resource, and finance. So the major categorization is in terms of the products, but to facilitate their functioning, we have different staff functions, which are business development, legal, HR, etc. This type of a structure is, ideal for organizations with multiple products and can help shorten product development cycles. But again, this also has a disadvantage, is that it is very difficult to scale and that the organization may end up with duplicate resources as different divisions strive for autonomy. Now, this is a big challenge here. However, yes, many organizations have tried to overcome this, disadvantage also, and they have tried to see how it can be better and more efficiently managed. Coming to the next aspect of a geographical component here. Now, if an organization spans multiple geographic regions and the product or service needs to be localized, it often requires organization by region. This is very, very clear because it is pan, it's global, it is, having its branches all across. So yes, the structuring, involves grouping activities based on geography, that is the location. And it is, especially important if the tastes and brand responses differ across region, because it allows for flexibility in product offering and market strategy. So you cannot have a similar strategy, you cannot have a totally similar product all across. So there is where this structure might work. It may be necessary because of cost and availability of resources also, and of course distribution strategies. More so very important are the laws in different nations, they differ. So, you need to keep in account the kind of laws, the kind of government regulations and policies which are prevalent. So, that is about the geographic. And yes, it is best suited for organizations which need to be near the source of supply or even their customers. So in case they're requiring a lot of raw materials and the customers are very different, so they need to be there with them. Again, this also has disadvantages. The main disadvantage is that it can be very easy for decision making to become decentralized. And the divisions can sometimes be huge in number. Let's say they are thousands and they are away from the corporate headquarters. So, it generally makes a lot of decentralization, which many times does not really work very well. So keeping that in mind, of course, the lot of changes, lot of custom made solutions need to be sought for. Then moving next, we have another very, very important category, which is definitely one of the most complicated, I would say, but very, very common, and that is called as a metric structure. Now here, the individuals are grouped by two different operational perspectives at the same time. Two different perspectives. So this structure, if you can see, I'll just, so this is a functional structure, what I had explained to you, and this is geographical. As you can see, the divisions have been done keeping in mind, North America, PAC, and then Europe, of course, and then Europe also you have continental, and then you have Russia, like that. This is customer centric, as I had already told you, where you have, customers, you have different services here. So for each, you have a different chain of command. So this is a metric structure. So if you see, they are, grouped by two different operational perspective at the same time. This structure has a lot of advantages and disadvantages, but it is, generally best employed by companies which have large enough to justify this increased complexity. Either their projects are multiple, they are multiple locations, they have different functions which are running parallelly, those kind of detailing. So the company is organized by both product and function. So, product lines are managed horizontally, functions are managed vertically. Here you see we have projects and we have designations. So it means that for each function, you have a separate internal division. In a matrix organization, the company is grouped by the perspectives it seems most appropriate. Now, it is definitely depending upon the company. Common perspectives are function and product, function and region, sometimes, region and product also. So in an organization which is grouped accordingly, they have different matrices which they plot. It can be 9 into 9 also, 3 into 3 also, depending upon their capacity. The proponents of the management matrix structure generally argue that this structure allows team members to, share information more readily across the task boundary, which is relevant, of course, because it addresses the silo problem of functional management. It also allows for specialization, which can increase depth of knowledge and enable individuals to be assigned, according to the project requirement. But as others, this also has disadvantages. The disadvantage is that it is very complex in terms of the chain of command when employees are assigned to different kind of functions here. If you can see, and it results in a lot of, higher manager to worker ratio. Sometimes it increases a lot of costs and leads to conflicting employee loyalties. So it creates kind of a gridlock, in decision making if a manager on one end of the matrix disagrees with another manager. So here it hampers decision making and it creates complexity. So generally organization would definitely try to come up with a proper solution to a problem like this. Now, when we talk about the delegation aspect, now, if you see delegation here, there are one, two, three, accountability, authority, and responsibility. Delegation is important in order to expedite decision making. Delegation is, as a function, very important to talk about the effectiveness and efficiency in an organization. So if we talk about the three main elements, the three aspects here. So the responsibility is when assigning the work to an individual, the managers assign, certain responsibility to the subordinates for the completion of certain tasks on his behalf. So an individual, has to apply all his physical and mental ability to get the task completed efficiently. So that is one case. So manager can only, assign the responsibility, and in the case of the subordinate fouls, if he's not able to do it, the manager will be answerable to his senior. So responsibility generally it flows upwards also. So if a person is able to do the work, well and good. If not, then take the responsibility. Authority, on the other hand, is to fulfill the responsibility. Certain authority needs to be delegated to the subordinate. We would all agree to it. Authority means the power to take decisions. Hence, the manager, along with the responsibility, also delegates authority. The reason is very simple, because the decision taking has to be done independently and accomplish the task efficiently. But there is a very important catch here which says that the authority should be equal to responsibility, because a certain level of authority is delegated, which is sufficient to complete the responsibility. So it really goes hand in hand. When I talk about accountability as a component here, it really means to check whether the subordinates are performing their responsibilities in an expected manner or not. The accountability cannot be delegated, which means in case of non-completion of the task, the manager definitely becomes, responsible for it and not the subordinates. So as responsibility, accountability also flows upwards, and it states that the subordinates will be accountable to the manager and the manager to his superior. So it kind of flows in a proper structured manner. Okay. Now we have the process of delegation. Now this is a small example where this can definitely work wonders if it is done in a very proper and systematic manner, where we talk about the assignment of duties to subordinate from at the first level, where the manager lists the activities to be performed along with the targets which need to be achieved, and it has very clearly been stated to the subordinate. Transferring, the second stage which talks about transferring is actually the transferring of authority to perform that duty. So if you just convey the information, it doesn't really help. You have to transfer the authority, because at this stage, adequate authority should be delegated, which is definitely essential to perform the duty assigned to that person. Third stage, when we talk about the acceptance. Now this is acceptance of the work which has been given, because at a this stage, if there is no clarity, the work cannot be done properly. The subordinate will either accept it or reject it, reject the task which has been given to him by the superior. And in case there are reasons of rejection, then yes, it has to be stated very, very clearly. Last stage talks about accountability. This is a very important stage here, because the process of delegation ends at the creation of an obligation at the part of the subordinate, that he has to perform his responsibility within the powers which has been assigned to him. So once the subordinate accepts it, then he becomes very responsible for the completion of the duty and is accountable to the superior for his performance. So the process of delegation really begins with the duties assigned to the subordinates and ends with the subordinate is obliged to carry out the operations as required and as intended. So on that note, I would end the topic here. So thank you very much.